Hi, everyone. This is great. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on how chief legal officers are making an outsized impact in 2022. Please feel free to use the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from, and feel free to introduce yourselves there. My name is Mary O'Carroll. I'm the Chief Community Officer here at Ironclad, and I will be your moderator today. A little bit about me, my background. Prior to joining Ironclad last year, I spent 13 years running legal operations at Google and was also the president of an organization called CLOC, the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium. I am so happy to be joined today by two amazing women, CLOs at two amazing tech companies. We Michelle Lau, the CLO at GoDaddy. I will allow them to take a moment to introduce themselves. Carolyn, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. I'm so pleased to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Mary. I am Carolyn Herzog. I am the Chief Legal Officer at Elastic. I recently joined Elastic, and it's been a great adventure so far. Elastic is an interesting company. We're a leading company in search, observability, and security. We are dual headquartered in the Netherlands and the United States and traded on the New York Stock Exchange. I'm super happy to be back in the world of big data and security. It's very familiar to me. I spent about 20 years working in cybersecurity, the majority of that with Symantec. And in the last 5 years, I was the general counsel of ARM. So dabbled in the world of semiconductor. ARM was the world's leading semiconductor, is the world's leading semiconductor IP company, headquartered in the UK. So I love international companies, multinational companies, but I'm back understanding what acronyms mean again, although every company has their own form of acronyms, and that's a fun, place to dabble into. So really pleased.
Absolutely. Two super exciting companies. And Michelle, over to you.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here. Michelle Lau, I'm the Chief Legal Officer at GoDaddy. GoDaddy's mission is to empower entrepreneurs everywhere, making opportunity more inclusive for all. We offer seamless and intuitive technology complemented by practical guidance, through what we call our care guides, to help entrepreneurs grow their businesses and achieve their dreams. It is a mission that makes my heart sing. Together with a dedicated team around the world of 90 plus, I handle law, compliance, internal audit, corporate sustainability, ESG, and government and industry affairs for the company.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm super excited to get started, so let's dive right in. For everyone who was in attendance and watching, thank you so much for submitting questions during your registration process. We received a ton. We've tried to curate them and kind of lump them together, so we will use those as a guide as we go through the conversation today. We had three big themes emerge from the questions that were really around career growth, how legal can provide value to the business, and then, of course, planning for 2023. So that's how we've structured our conversation today. And before getting started, I guess a little bit of housekeeping as well. The questions submitted during registration will probably take up most of the session because we got really good ones. But we do have moderators who are watching the chat, and they will take questions live as well. So go ahead and put those in there, and we'll see if we can get to them. So first, the first theme that I wanted to jump into is really about career development. I think a lot of people look up to you in your roles, and the career path and leadership that you're the roles that you're in. To get started, I guess I'd love it if you could kind of share a little bit about the path that you've taken to get here. What did it look like? How did you get to the CLO role that is a goal for so many people in our audience? Maybe we'll start with you, Michelle.
Sure. Thanks so much. Maybe I'll share a little bit about my background before I went to law school, because it actually informed some of how I've thought about my legal career. I grew up in San Francisco, have extended family in San Francisco that believes strongly in travel as a form of education. And so we traveled a lot when I was young, and really instilled a value of trying new things and exploring. After I went to college, I worked for the Japanese government for a few years. I worked for a mid-sized city in the Foreign Affairs Division, and that was just a tremendous learning experience, and really taught me how important it is to not make assumptions about what roles people have, about where they're coming from, about their values, and that is something that has been a core tenet for me throughout my legal career as well. I then went to a law school at Cornell, started my career at Morrison and Foerster, and then went to a Fortune 10 healthcare company a little bit on a whim. I actually wasn't looking to leave private practice. I loved my clients and the firm, but an opportunity came up, and I took the jump. And sometimes I think about that of how that's probably not the best way to make a career move, but it felt right. And I am a list maker. I make lists of pros and cons, but at the end of the day, I go with my gut. So I did that, and started off as the first dedicated M&A lawyer for the company. After about a year, thought, gosh, I used to have a broader portfolio. How can I continue to grow? And so I started to look around and look for the unmet needs. So the departments and the groups within the company that didn't have a legal partner, and asked if I could take on those. And then once I had that reputation for being someone that wanted to learn more and try new things, those opportunities started to come to me. And so I actually never anticipated I would stay at my first company for 13 years, but I did, because every few years I kept getting a new role and the ability to try something new, and I was continuously learning. And then similarly, I loved the company, loved the people I worked with, and then this opportunity at GoDaddy came up, and I was actually in the process of moving from California to Texas with my old company. This opportunity came up, and did a pivot and ended up moving up here to Seattle. So I tell people that you never know, right, when a new branch in your career tree will pop up, and it definitely did for me. So though I'm proud to say that um, we didn't actually have to change our moving date. So we had scheduled movers for June 30th of 2021, and we still moved on that date. We just told the movers to take us to Seattle instead of to Dallas.
Fantastic. And I got to meet you in Seattle outside your offices, which are on
Yeah.
the waterfront and so beautiful. So encourage everyone to go visit Michelle and GoDaddy out there. And I love the themes that you mentioned, right? Building relationships, building the trust of the department, trying on new hats throughout the department. That definitely sets you up for success. Caroline, how about you? Did you have a similar path or experience?
It's I love doing, programs like this, because you learn so much about people that you admire, and then you find out these things that you have in common. So it's so interesting. It's similar but different. I grew up actually in Madison, Wisconsin. My parents were from New York. My family originally came to the United States during the Holocaust. So grew up with a family that also valued travel, but also that experience of understanding what it's like being a little bit different. I ended up marrying somebody from Wisconsin, and he understood the Wisconsin geography, and that the Green Bay Packers are the most important thing in the universe. But I only knew my way from Madison to New York and didn't really understand the rest of Wisconsin. I was always fascinated by travel and all things international, but I studied French and music undergraduate, and I think I graduated from school having just come back from France, and everybody was talking about the MCATs and the LSTATs, and again, I was like, what are those acronyms? I don't really know what they are. So immediately started waitressing, because it was something that I was quite familiar with and pretty good at. I still am pretty good at it, and I like to keep those skills alive just in case. But I got a letter from my grandmother, who was a fashion designer, but as I said, a Holocaust survivor, and said, the letter, I still have it, was scathing, and said, "You have been given every advantage in life. Get off your butt and go do something." So fortunately, I had a friend that called me just then and said, "I'm moving to Washington D.C. Do you want to come?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And so I was very lucky. I got a job in the African department of the World Bank. And it was heaven for me. I was always fascinated by Africa. I had been taking courses on African history and African dance and African music. And here I was, a block down from the White House, speaking French every day. And I was so happy. And, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned in life is, my grandmother had sponsors that enabled her to get from Austria to the United States eventually. I had sponsors starting from the time I worked at the World Bank, and people that said, well, this is not the place for you. When are you going to law school? And I thought, law school? Why would I go to law school? And I kind of got that DC infection. I thought, well, I think I need to go to graduate school somehow, and I don't think I'm going to pass, an economics course. And so I think maybe I'll go to law school. And I did. And I I ended up working for a nonprofit after law school. But I kept going back and forth to France, and that's what I was meant to do. And I worked for a nonprofit that was World Bank funded. I actually made less money after law school than I did before, which was absolutely baffling to my father. He just couldn't figure this whole story out. But um, met somebody who I brought in to do a transfer of technology program for my delegation. And he literally had like springs in his feet working for a technology company that he thought was like the best thing in the whole world. I didn't even know what a license agreement was, but the whole nonprofit thing was not exactly what I thought I wanted to do either. And I ended up getting a job at this company, thinking like I was still young enough, I could still experiment. It was sort of like Michelle, like I had a lot of curiosity for a lot of things. And strangely enough, I loved it. I loved it. You can just keep dabbling and doing all these different things and trying new things. There was just so much to do. 3 years later, I ended up being the general counsel because everybody else left, frankly. And 18 months after that, Symantec acquired that company, and I ended up being with Symantec for 16 years. I moved to London. I just had so many different experiences, great bosses, people that enabled me to try new things. And it was just as much like Michelle's experience. I loved the travel. I loved poking around and meeting new clients and saying, well, what are you doing over here? And can I help with this? And can I help with that? And so I think the theme is that, a career isn't a straight line. I think it's this, wavy line. We just did an exercise with my leadership team around career paths and lifelines. And, nobody has a straight line. You dip down and, within that story, there were lows and there were highs. And you learn a lot from the mistakes that you made and, things that didn't go right, but also from the great community that you build around you and the people that build you up and those wonderful clients that partner with you and do lots of different interesting things. So it's been a massive surprise, but a huge amount of satisfaction along the way as well.
Fantastic. And we're seeing a real uptake in the prevalence of CLOs. And how do you guys think that's different from the traditional general counsel role? And maybe why are we seeing so much more of the CLO these days?
Yeah. To me, I think it's a reflection of the remit of CLOs expanding significantly beyond legal over the past
Mm-hmm.
several years. The functions that many CLOs oversee, myself included, is really broad and varied, and that's super challenging and very exciting at the same time. As CLOs, we need to consider not just legal and compliance implications, but also to put problems into context, right? And consider reputational, financial, strategic, operational impacts, and consider how different stakeholder groups, so our customers, employees, shareholders, regulators, and communities, will be impacted, have expectations, and really to pull that all together. So to me, that's kind of what has created the structure for a lot of places to have both a general counsel, which may focus a little more on the legal, and then the CLOs who have much broader remits. And so I think I loved, Carolyn, your comments about just the curiosity and agility, because I think those really are some of the key skill sets that one needs to be a CLO today.
I completely agree. And I think some of it is nomenclature. So in some ways, it's about who you are as a leader. And it may not matter whether or not you call yourself a general counsel or a CLO. I think people are moving towards that because it connects to the C-suite and sort of what you're doing. But
Mm-hmm.
it's also, it creates that space to do all those different things. I think there's so many people like Michelle and myself who have more than the legal function that we lead, and also the way that we contribute to the conversation in the C-suite is more than a legal conversation.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it continues to show how the legal department and the legal leaders are expanding in the scope and the strategic nature of their roles, which is very exciting because that has a lot of implications for the way the department is run and how you leverage technology and how you interact with the C-suite. Michelle, you kind of touched on it already, but I think the next question that we got a lot of in different variations is what skill sets, what kinds of experiences are required to be successful as a CLO? If you're an AGC, how do you start to prepare for that next step in your journey? Any thoughts or ideas on that, guys?
Well, I think certainly the curiosity is key. and often being able to probe and ask questions in a manner that is disarming and not, not interpreted as judgmental, because we need in our roles, we need to get people to open up. Certainly the agility, the rapidly evolving regulatory and external landscape, coupled with multiple, sometimes conflicting stakeholder expectations, means we need to be flexible.
Yeah.
And then, of course, strong leadership is key. I mean, that was true particularly during COVID, for many of us remaining in a largely remote world. But then now also with the volatile macroeconomic environment, it's even more important for us to be strong leaders, to be authentic and candid, as transparent as we can be, to keep people engaged, and really to help rally people around the highest priorities. I also loved, Carolyn, your comment about community, because I think both the question about what skill sets and experiences are required to be successful, and why we're seeing a rise of CLOs, really also speaks to how important it is to have a community, because no person is going to be expert at everything.
Mhm.
And we really need to leverage our teams, but also our communities for help.
I completely agree. And one of the things I've been reading more and more about is how important for all leaders it is for us to be empathetic. And that was even more important during the pandemic. I think a lot of people have been suffering from mental health issues. There's a broad spectrum around that, and require just a different connection. You have to be both strong and empathetic, and that connection is so important, and we're doing that in a more remote environment. Elastic is a completely distributed company, which people really value, but it requires a different remit to connect to people. And so people want that vision that Michelle talked about. One of the things that I've done, and Michelle, I will be calling you, is I brought in, it kind of goes to the beginning of your question, Mary, which I think is fantastic, is once upon a time, in order to sit in this seat, one, you had to be male, probably white, and you also had to come from a law firm and be a corporate lawyer. And I really love to share with the teams. I brought in a series of general counsels in my prior job, and I love to continue that. Is share the perspectives is how we got here. Is exactly this conversation that you're asking us to share, which is we all come from different places, different backgrounds, different experiences, and people really have. When I was graduating from law school, and even I went to a very public policy, hippie kind of oriented school, I went back to Wisconsin for law school, but nobody actually shared with us all the opportunities that are available for lawyers today. I met a guy, that was running a mustard museum in, northern Wisconsin once. And I think actually lawyers are doing a huge variety of tasks, and the legal operations function is just so interesting in terms of enabling in-house, counsel to run the legal department as a business. And so anybody, who's in this space could become general counsel from any background. And it's about how you're leading in the function and about how you're connecting people, as Michelle said.
100%, 100%. So I'm going to move us into part two, the next theme that kind of emerged after career paths, which is providing value to the business. And I think all of us know this is the question, this is the topic that comes up over and over again. How do you demonstrate the value of the legal department? How do you demonstrate the value of the GC to the rest of the business? And so, how does the in-house team prove its worth? How does it prove its value to the business from your perspective? I know that's something you probably hear a lot, and specifically, or maybe relatedly, another question that came up was, what data is your business most interested in seeing from legal? There's that aspect of managing up. How do you do that? Carolyn, you want to take that first?
Sure. I mean, I think there's different perspectives from different companies in my experience, and also it has changed drastically over
Mhm.
time. And so, I have found that it helps to ask. I like to say feedback is a gift as long as it's given with good intentions. There's no such thing as pleasing all the people all the time, but determining value has to start with what are the objectives of the company? What are you trying to achieve? What are the most important things that you're trying to achieve? Because we're all going to be working off of a budget. We're all going to be working with limited resources. We have to connect our resources in the most effective, efficient way. Michelle beautifully pointed out earlier that, we have community. And once upon a time, I think lawyers kind of worked in like their own little silo. This is what I do. This is my specialty. This is my subject matter expertise. You ask me a question, I'm going to give you an answer. that's not how it works anymore. And,
Hmm.
as part of our professional development, it's so much more interesting to learn together and to learn how to do other things. But identifying roles and responsibilities, demonstrating through not only through KPIs, but also through results, those results in terms of being part of the team. There's nothing more rewarding for me than to see, the quarterly results, and for people talking about how we won as an organization, to see, members of my legal team as part of that. We won together. And how do we win together? Because we partnered as a team and we figured out how to find that solution. You can't, it's not the department of no, it's not the department of yes. It has to be a solution oriented process. And so some of the things that we look at in terms of defining that value is how we're becoming more efficient. It can't be the number of contracts that you processed. It has to be, how did you make that run a little bit faster? How did you find self-service? What are the things that we did in terms of, reviewing regulation and actually driving that towards the value of the organization a little bit faster? Because, my organization currently didn't ask me to give them any KPIs or drive anything. I actually said, look, I think I can, our outside counsel were all over the place. We're starting to run a panel. I actually can show you how I'm saving some money and how we're getting more information from our counsel and partnering better. I want to show you how we're running diversity for our panels, because we weren't tracking necessarily how we're working with more diverse firms or partners in anywhere else in the business. So those are just a few examples of some of the things that we're doing.
So a big plus one to starting with understanding the priorities of the company. I couldn't agree more that there was a time, right, where I think that a lot of lawyers in particular would just kind of be heads down and think about how do we focus on mitigating risk, and now it really is about how do you help be the strategic connector across the enterprise, apply that enterprise view, think about the external landscape, and be a strategic business partner. So and that all starts with understanding the priorities of the company. I think also there are things that we can do in our role structurally to help facilitate that. So as you mentioned earlier, Mary, the building relationships and building trust is absolutely critical. And so one of the things that I really like to do, and one of the things I've done here, is to make sure that we have a point person in the room with every business unit and functional leadership team. Here we call, on the legal side, we call them business unit lawyers and functional lead lawyers. And we have one person who is designated to be on the extended leadership team for each of those leaders, so that they can really understand the context and the priorities for those specific business unit and functions, and bring those back to us as a department, so that we are looking across the enterprise. And to your point, Carolyn, really helping to drive outcomes and problem solve and think of solutions that will keep that big picture in mind. It's interesting. The data question is I mean, so powerful. Like, I know, I often get asked, um, what data is your business most interested in, or how do you prove your value through data? And that starts with having the right tools. So, thinking about, like, what are the relevant KPIs? What are the relevant metrics for us? How do we make sure that we have the right tools so that we can pull that data? Things for me, as an example, looking out, where is our outside counsel spend going? Are we getting the right discounts? Are we being strategic about it? Does our litigation footprint look, and how is it evolving over time in terms of by geography or by type? And how do we share that visibility, share that data with our business partners to help inform the decisions that we make, right? Because sometimes there are decisions that we make collectively that have downstream impacts, that have real costs, but we don't even know that until several months later. So being able to track that and then bring that back to them helps make us make better decisions going forward. And that's really what it's about, right? It's about just improving a little bit more every day.
Yeah. And I love what both of you are saying, because the mindset and the culture that it sounds like you're both setting in your departments is one that is absolutely not reactive. You are not sitting back waiting for direction. You're not waiting for someone to tell you what KPIs are useful. Both of you have mentioned many times, partnering with the business, looking outside the walls of the department, thinking about the future of the company, not your department. And that is what people really want from the legal department, and people want from the GC or the CLO. Um, so on to our next question, which I, of course, cherry picked this one. It's not going to be a surprise. But we got a few questions about legal operations and legal chiefs of staff. And so I've mushed a couple of questions together. I know the answer already because you guys are both amazing CLOs, but do your companies have legal operations personnel? Are you seeing an uptick in those roles? How does that fit in with the CLO and legal ops? How do they work together? What are the benefits from legal operations? All that good stuff. So tell us basically why you have legal ops and why it's awesome. Who wants to take that first?
Carolyn, you go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think, I've learned so much from, the development of this legal operations specialty and how it's grown over the years. I'm amazed at what legal operations can do. I developed a legal operations team in my prior team. One of the things that I've noticed is there wasn't necessarily always just that primary function when I came into a team, and we separated out the teams and said, no, this is going to be a segregated team on its own, really specializing, and also not making it a dumping ground for everything administrative. It has to be a specialty. And it's, in service of helping to drive the business of the legal department. And so, Clock has this beautiful, design of what could your legal operations function be? But there's so many areas of, I've always had this reaction of sort of saying, well, lawyers aren't creative or legal professionals aren't creative, but there's so much innovation in what we do. And legal operations is, a central point of that. Like, of course, we want creativity in how we manage our budget, because you have to look at sort of, again, those priorities and where are you going to prioritize the functions and sort of what are you putting more of your money into. My last company was absolutely focused on IP, and how are we going to really focus on the IP. Your current company may be looking at something different. So by understanding those objectives, where are you going to leverage your resources? What's more important for your team right now? What do they really need? And you may look at things differently from year to year or even from quarter to quarter. And legal operations can really help you facilitate what's most important for your organization. So there's knowledge management. There's so many interesting things you can do with knowledge management. I think really directing that and partnering with the general counsel and all of your leaders to say, what are we going to do? How are we going to facilitate this? I've had some really interesting conversations with other executive leaders talking about how legal operations does do some of the things that other operational leaders do, but it's a unique function. It's very unique to the legal function and does, very special things for our organization.
Great. Anything to add to that, Michelle?
Yeah, so I know exactly that visual, that wheel that you're talking about, Carolyn, that also like is near and dear to my heart. One of the first things, I mean, this is a resounding yes, right? In terms of, do we have a legal ops function? It was one of the very first things that I did was to create one. And it was interesting because I knew immediately that there was a need. I'd seen the value of legal ops at my prior company. They were some of my closest partners. And then when I came here, I did a listening tour. So I met with a lot of people outside the department, board members, but also I met with all 90 people in the department to ask them what's going well, what do you do, what do you like, what do I need to know? And I already knew in the back of my mind that I was going to create a legal ops function. So I took the opportunity through those one-on-ones to kind of probe out like different aspects of legal ops. And it was so interesting. There were 3 people who, when I kind of shared the idea of legal ops and told them a little bit about it was, and that wheel that you're talking about, Carolyn, I probably shared with them. I mean, they like jumped out of their seats practically with excitement about it. So the 3 of them came together, and we have that, small but mighty team that has driven just tremendous value for the department and the company. Like, I literally could not live without them. They have been critical in helping set the department's strategy and helping us think about how to be prudent stewards of our capital, in creating leveling guides and putting more kind of meat around talent development. So, I mean, really just such a critical role. And I could not imagine running this department without a legal ops function.
Awesome. Thank you guys. You've both done your job for the day.
Good.
And if someone can put up in the chat, a link to that wheel, it's the Clock Core 12, which really was a definition of what can fall into the scope of legal operations from the Clock organization. Okay, another question. Let me skip down, actually, in the interest of time. We've got, great. Today, we hear more and more CLOs talking about topics like social impact, ESG, DEI. In fact, I don't think you can go to a legal industry event and not hear some of these terms. So, how do these areas play into your responsibilities as a legal leader?
You go first, Michelle.
Sure. So corporate sustainability and ESG, just from a structural perspective, are part of my remit, which I absolutely love. One of the things that I so appreciate is how deep the commitment is at GoDaddy. It's embedded in our mission. That mission of empowering entrepreneurs and making opportunity more inclusive for all is our North Star. It guides everything we do. It's what inspires our workforce to come and do their very best. So, I'm starting from a place of already being biased towards loving that space, and then being in a company that has such deep commitment. But when I think about, like, sometimes people ask me, like, why is it in the legal function? So I think the easy answer is, well, there's clear synergy between kind of corporate sustainability and ESG and legal and compliance, because there's increased focus by investors and regulators. And that's true. But even before then, because I had, there was a time where I had some oversight of this at my old company as well. I think there's incredible synergy, because when I think about a lot of the functions that tend to fall within legal, including corporate sustainability and ESG, it is about thinking holistically about the company, the
Mhm.
strategy, and thinking about both internal and external stakeholders. And so that gives us all the opportunity to amplify each other's work, which is just terrific. I couldn't, for anyone who is a CLO that doesn't have corporate sustainability, ESG, social impact in their remit, I would, recommend advocating for it, because not only is it super fun, but it gives you a unique and different view into a lot of the same aspects or a lot of the same issues that you're dealing with already.
Absolutely.
So, one of the things, it's interesting because I did oversee ESG in my prior company, and coming into Elastic, had a great conversation with our CHRO, and she said, I really love this and I really want to run it, and it is okay. I said, absolutely, because it's about that passion and where it is. And part of it is that partnership. And we had lots of conversations about where does it belong. And I completely agree with everything that Michelle said, and that you look at it and sort of where does it belong, and it makes total sense to belong in the legal department. But the key aspect about where things belong is that accountability in an organization. And the accountability for me is obviously in the governance piece, and making sure that when we connect it, we look at the investor impact. We look at the ownership around key issues that I'm particularly passionate about, like diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Which there's the ownership piece in terms of who runs it. And obviously, whenever we talk about DE&I, and whenever you talk to HR professionals, they say, well, yeah, we own it, but the whole company has to own it. And
Mhm.
I love
That's right.
about what I do and what we do is that there's so much about what we do in terms of there's a legal aspect, but really we're leaders. And what we're doing is pointing out the risk areas, but the responsibility areas. And as leaders in organizations, and we see this across the world, what we're doing is asking the company to have a voice. And, there's a lot more happening in terms of social good, social responsibility, social governance. ESG is bringing a lot of this together. A lot of the legal requirements came out of Europe. It's very interesting for me working for a company that is dual headquartered, and having a Dutch headquarters where we have stakeholder interests that come into this is fascinating. But it's about who do we want to be as a company? Our employees drive a lot of that. We are a representation of our employees because there's potential legal issues around that, but also that partnership as an executive in the corporate voice, the voice of the CEO. And one of the first things I did, coming into my last company, coming into my new company, was understanding who the CEO is, understanding how that voice was going to be demonstrating. And you see a lot of surveys now with the UN, and with others with 2023 vision, and companies are playing a bigger part in influencing politics. We don't want to be politicians. We don't want companies to play the role of politics, and nevertheless, that influence is there, and we want everybody to feel included in our companies. We want to do a better job of, and I think CLOs have a really important job here of making sure that everybody belongs. Everybody feels included. Everybody belongs. and that we're not creating that divisiveness that we see out there, and that we can have a civil conversation, that we can create an environment where everybody can feel like it's a safe place to be.
Yeah. It's such a great topic. I love seeing the scope as part of the expansion of the role. There's always so much passion, so much creativity in it. And we could really talk about this for a long time. But the third section or the third theme that we have coming from our questions is really about planning for 2023. And it's going to be an interesting time for everyone. We know we are in the midst of an economic downturn. A lot of us are in budget cycle right now. We know that it's tightening of the belt time again. We've been here before, many of us, and yet the work we also know is not going away. I have come from a series of legal ops and legal industry events over the past couple months, and that theme has come up over and over, where you have less resources, you're not getting headcount, you're not getting budget, but that work is not going away. And so you're really going to have to learn to stretch yourselves. Some of the questions we got around that: what are some of the best practices for continuing to innovate in a down economy? How can you increase the productivity of your team without just adding more hours and more people? And so related to that, kind of the next question, of course, is also about technology, and what the legal toolkit looks like from here on out. I think those are all quite related. Michelle, maybe I'll start with you. How does that look for 2023?
Sure. Well, yes, it is certainly a crazy time right now, and I think we're all feeling it. I am mindful, though. I think about how when 2001 happened, like I that was kind of my first downturn as a professional, and I felt like the sky was falling. And then
Mm-hmm.
fast forward to 2008, and then there's another period where it was kind of like batten down the hatches. I am mindful, though, that we probably all have a number of members of our team who weren't working in 2001 or
That's
2008. So
right.
this actually may be the first time that they're
That's
experiencing
right.
it. And I try to keep that in mind because it can be scary. And this is where I think as leaders, prioritization and communication are always important, but particularly now. Right. So not just for the like how do we do more with fewer resources, but also in terms of keeping employees feeling engaged and included. But prioritization, I think, just understanding the company's priorities, how those priorities are shifting. I mean, just inherently, when you have fewer resources, you really have to have focus. And that
Mm-hmm.
focus, we all need to be marching in the same direction, right? We can't have different parts of the company with different priorities because that doesn't work because nobody works in a silo. And that all requires really, really great communication. So doing that at the C level, bringing that back to our leadership teams, um, figuring out how we work smarter, right? And that goes to the technology piece. Like we need to be sure that we don't get so wrapped up in the day-to-day firefighting that we lift our heads and figure out how to streamline and work more efficiently. And this is where sometimes, there's a tool that will cost a little bit of money, but it's a prudent. I call it prudent investments
Mm-hmm.
because the return is going to be tremendous in terms of the time saved, the faster turnaround, more efficient for our partners, but then also kind of freeing up resources for more strategic projects. So it's going to require just a lot of focus, a lot of prioritization, great communication, and just making sure you have very, very clear alignment.
And what about the tech and tooling piece? Because I'm a very strong advocate for, when things are tight, that is not when you stop investing in technology. That's really, like you said, you really get to think about the return on the investment and extract, and scale your department with something different than hours and people. Have you approached that in your career?
Yeah, very much, and an active conversation now, even. Yeah, for sure. Because I agree with you, Mary. A lot of times, I think the knee jerk reaction is okay. So we have to cut costs, and so we
Right.
were going to make these technology investments, and so we should just cut those now.
Right.
But the problem with that is that means that we may be continuing to do manual processes, over here,
Exactly.
and it's not sustainable to continue to do those without more headcount, and you're not getting more headcount, right? So you really have to figure out how to work smarter. So I completely agree. Like this, the technology piece should not be the first thing that people cut. It should be,
Yeah,
is this a prudent investment?
that's right.
Mhm.
That's right. Carolyn, what are you seeing on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I just, I'm nodding vehemently. Like like Michelle, I was like, I remember going to, the Prince Purple Rain concert and, dancing along to I'm going to party like it's 1999. And then I remember being in my office, like physically mailing out my Y2K letters and I was literally just, writing to my budget manager talking about like, this is going to be a 0 0 even ROI investment if we have to invest in this technology because we're trying to drive efficiency and people are going to be overworked and they're going to be burnt out. And so interestingly enough, like everybody went into this pandemic predicting all of these downturns, but in the technology sector, in fact, what happened is that for the most part we had a boon, and then people were working remotely, working harder in many places, but we saw a lot of people moving to remote places. A lot of people, particularly younger, were asking for more, and then they're going to be facing something that they really haven't seen before. A lot of us have seen these ups and downs and understand what it means to tighten belts, but a lot of people haven't really seen that, and it's coming straight off of a time when a lot of companies were seeing this massive uptick in people asking for more, and you had more and more staff, but maybe not understanding a lot of that drive for efficiency because people are moving so quickly.
Right.
And, we're very much talking about this need for efficiency, not only for people's sanity, but you have to move smoother, faster. You have to be able to serve your clients. And, it's better for the mental well-being of your employees. You're going to get better certainty, you're going to get better governance, you're going to get better information, and you're going to be able to serve your customers in a better, faster way. So finding the right tools and being able to enable those is exactly where companies should be going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with 100% with all of that. And I would also say, I would add, it's also, I think, critical for professional development.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I'm thinking about a conversation I just had recently with someone who said, I so want to focus on, these kind of higher level, maybe higher level is not the right word, but more strategic projects that will help me have a voice externally in our industry. But I don't have time because my core responsibilities right now rely on a technology that is not reliable. And so I spend a lot of time doing things manually. And so there's also an aspect of, I mean, yes, we want to serve our customers better. We want to be more efficient. We want to make sure that people aren't burned out, but it's also, we want to be able to help them reshuffle their portfolio so that they can learn new things and help continue to grow rather than doing the same kind of more manual things over and over again.
Yeah. I even had the same conversation with somebody who was mired in trying to implement a technology. And I said, I promise you, it's so painful, but learning how to do this is a really good
Yes.
professional development opportunity. People will want to know how to do this. I
Right.
promise.
Yeah, and you guys nailed it. I love the takeaway that is work smarter, not harder in a time like this. And I similarly had a conversation about technology with a bunch of lawyers in LATAM last week, and they're a little bit earlier in the journey of transformation for legal, and they were asking, is technology going to take jobs away? Is it going to take work away from the lawyers? And I said exactly what you said, Michelle. It's going to make your job better. It's going to take away the stuff you don't want to do. And there's going to be a bigger need for lawyers just doing the right type of work.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for all your valuable insights and takeaways. You guys have been amazing. We're a little bit low on time, so I want to wrap things up with, a big question, which doesn't have to be speedy, but kind of what is the one thing on your mind as you approach and plan for 2023? Let's start with Michelle.
Wow. I think just remembering that one of the skills that we have as leaders is leading through complexity, often without perfect information. That's always true. But I think that's going to be particularly true in 2023, just because things are so volatile. And so, I tell people who are earlier in their career that that's one of the secrets to success about being a CLO. And they say, how do you do that? And I say, it's through practice, right? It's, you can't really plan to be uncomfortable. You just have to practice being in times of uncertainty and leading through that complexity and knowing you don't have the perfect information, but you just have to apply the best judgment that you can. So I actually think that in some ways, there are gifts in this next year as well, because it will help people practice that muscle.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think in some twisted way, it's actually more fun to be in business in times of constraint because it really makes every decision matter and everything you do really impactful.
Yep.
So you have to
Yep.
think and work a little harder to get to the right decisions. Carolyn, what's on your mind for 2023?
It's hard to top that, for Michelle. I think it's very similar, and that is making sure that we spend the time to set the vision for the organization, pivot if we need to, and
Mhm.
spend the time with people when we need to spend the time. I was talking to a colleague earlier, and I'm a pretty good fast talker, but this person was sort of spinning, right? And with all the things that were going on. And he grew up in Montreal, and there's always these great expressions with people that come from different places. And I recalled somebody that I'd worked with, at the World Bank in the early days. And she used to say, c'est pas la mer à boire. And she says, it's not, you don't have to drink the ocean. And so, I think setting that vision, getting through that complexity that Michelle talked about, and taking it one step at a time and just sticking to the plan.
Awesome. Well, it's been such a pleasure, such an honor to be with both of you today. While I still have everyone, I want to say thank you to Carolyn and Michelle for their time and for all their insights. And for everyone else, don't forget to register for our next big event coming up on December 8th. It's called Ironclad Live. And also, of course, be sure to join the Ironclad community. We will send out links for both, along with today's recording for everyone who's registered within the next day. So thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.